The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and military personnel as Guardsman Michael Harrison stood before the judge, his dress uniform immaculate despite the circumstances that had brought him there. Pinned to his chest was the distinctive purple ribbon and bronze cross that marked him as a recipient of Britain's highest military honor, the Victoria Cross. Judge Patricia Whitmore looked down at the case file with obvious distaste. The charges seemed almost absurd. Assault on a civilian, conduct unbecoming of a member of the armed forces, and bringing the Queen's Guard into disrepute. Yet here stood a decorated war hero, facing potential dismissal from service and criminal charges. Guardsman Harrison, the judge, began sternly. You stand accused of striking Mr. Derek Worthington outside Buckingham Palace 3 days ago. The incident was captured on multiple cameras and witnessed by dozens of tourists. How do you plead? Michael stood at attention, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Guilty, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. His military lawyer had advised him to plead not guilty, to fight the charges based on provocation. Michael had insisted on taking full responsibility for his actions. Mr. Derek Worthington sat in the front row with his expensive legal team, a satisfied smirk on his face. He was a wealthy businessman known for his controversial social media presence and his habit of provoking public figures for attention. His latest stunt had targeted the Queen's Guard, but it had backfired spectacularly when Michael finally lost his composure. Given your guilty plea, Judge Whitmore continued, and the serious nature of these charges against a member of the ceremonial guard, I am ordering you to remove that Victoria Cross immediately. You will surrender it to the court until sentencing, as you have shown yourself unworthy of wearing Britain's highest military honor. The courtroom fell into shocked silence. Even Worthington looked surprised. He had expected a fine or community service, not the public humiliation of forcing a war hero to surrender his medal. Michael's commanding officer, Colonel James Hartwell, half rose from his seat in protest, but Michael raised his hand slightly to stop him. Without a word of complaint, he began to unpin the medal from his uniform. Your Honor, interrupted a voice from the back of the courtroom. Before he removes that medal, I think this court should know exactly who Michael Harrison is and how he earned the right to wear it. Everyone turned to see an elderly man in a wheelchair making his way down the courtroom aisle. Despite his age and disability, he carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. His chest was covered with medals from conflicts spanning 5 decades. And who are you? Judge Whitmore asked. General Sir William Ashworth, retired. Man replied. I was Michael's commanding officer in Afghanistan. I'm also the man who recommended him for the Victoria Cross. Judge Whitmore looked uncertain. This was highly irregular, but the presence of such a distinguished military officer demanded attention. General, this is a criminal proceeding, not a military hearing. With respect, Your Honor, the general said, his voice carrying decades of command authority. Before you humiliate this man by forcing him to surrender that medal, you should understand exactly what he did to earn it. The public has a right to know who they're watching being stripped of honors. Worthington's lawyer objected, but Judge Whitmore was curious despite herself. Very well, General, but keep it brief. General. Ashworth positioned his wheelchair where everyone could see him clearly. Michael Harrison was serving as a lance corporal in Helmand Province in 2019. His patrol was ambushed while escorting a convoy of medical supplies to a remote village. The general's voice grew stronger as he continued. When the attack began, Michael's squad took cover in a damaged building, but the medical convoy was trapped in the open under heavy fire. The doctor, 2 nurses, and their driver were wounded and couldn't reach safety. Michael stood perfectly still, his face showing no emotion as his story was told. Had never spoken publicly about that day, and hearing it recounted in court felt surreal. Michael made a decision, the general continued. He ran into that killing field for separate times. Not once, not twice, but 4 times, carrying each wounded person to safety while enemy fighters targeted him specifically. The courtroom was completely silent now, hanging on every word. On his 4th trip, Michael was shot twice. Once in the leg, once in the shoulder. But he still carried the convoy driver to safety before allowing anyone to treat his own wounds. The doctor he saved that day now runs a children's hospital in Birmingham. The nurses he rescued have saved countless lives since then. Judge Whitmore found herself leaning forward, completely absorbed in the story. The investigation found that Michael had a clear escape route, the general said. He could have reached safety immediately when the ambush began. Instead, he chose to risk his life repeatedly for people he barely knew. The citation for his Victoria Cross reads, "For conspicuous gallantry and utter disregard for personal safety in the face of the enemy, General Ashworth turned his wheelchair to face Michael directly." After his recovery, this young man could have taken any posting he wanted, could have remained in Afghanistan, leading other soldiers. He could have joined special forces. He could have become an instructor, sharing his combat experience with new recruits. The general paused dramatically. Instead, he requested assignment to the Queen's Guard. "Do you know why, Your Honor?" Judge Whitmore shook her head completely. Invested in the story now, because he said he wanted to honor his fallen friends by representing the very best of British values. He wanted to stand at attention for those who couldn't stand anymore. He chose ceremonial duty not because it was easy, but because he saw it as the highest form of service he could provide. The silence in the courtroom was profound. Even Worthington looked uncomfortable now, realizing that his prank had targeted someone far more significant than he had understood. "So before you order this hero to surrender the medal he earned by risking his life for others," the general concluded, "perhaps the court should hear exactly what Mr. Worthington did to provoke this incident, because I suspect there's more to this story than a simple assault charge." Judge Whitmore looked at Michael with new eyes, seeing not just a defendant but a genuine war hero who had somehow ended up in her courtroom. "Guardsman Harrison," she said quietly, "perhaps you should tell the court exactly what happened 3 days ago." Michael finally spoke, his voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, I take full responsibility for my actions. But with your permission, I would like to explain what led to that moment," as he began his account of the events that had brought him to court. Everyone in the room realized they were about to hear a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about duty, honor, and the limits of human patience. Michael took a deep breath before beginning his account, his military training helping him maintain composure despite the emotional weight of what he was about to share. "Your Honor, 3 days ago I was on ceremonial duty at Buckingham Palace when Mr. Worthington approached my post. Initially, his behavior seemed like typical tourist curiosity, taking photos, asking questions that I couldn't answer while on duty." He paused, his eyes briefly meeting those of his accuser. "But then, Mr. Worthington began live streaming on social media, and his behavior changed dramatically. He started making increasingly personal and offensive comments, not just about me, but about my fellow guards and our military service." Derek Worthington shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His social media stunt had seemed hilarious at the time. It's guaranteed to get views and engagement from his followers who enjoyed watching him provoke authority figures. "He began by calling us overpaid mannequins in welfare cases in fancy costumes," Michael continued. "He suggested that we were all unemployable civilians playing dress-up for tourist money. I maintained my composure because this is unfortunately common behavior from some visitors." Judge Whitmore nodded, having heard similar complaints about tourist behavior at ceremonial sites. "The situation escalated when Mr. Worthington noticed my Victoria Cross," Michael said, his voice tightening slightly. "He began making specific comments about the medal, calling it fake jewelry, and suggesting that modern soldiers buy their medals online because real wars don't happen anymore." General Ashworth's hands gripped his wheelchair armrests tightly. He remembered the day he had pinned that medal on Michael's chest, pride he had felt in recognizing such extraordinary courage. "I continued to maintain my position," Michael went on. even when Mr. Worthington began discussing specific military operations, claiming that soldiers like me were murderers hiding behind patriotism, and that anyone who served in Afghanistan was either a coward or a killer. The military personnel in the courtroom exchanged angry glances. Worthington's comments had crossed lines that even his free speech rights couldn't protect. "But, Your Honor," Michael said, his voice now carrying a note of deep pain, "what finally broke my composure wasn't what he said about me. It was what he said about my friends who didn't come home." The courtroom was completely silent, everyone sensing that they were about to hear the heart of the matter. Mr. Worthington noticed that I wear a bracelet with names engraved on it, the names of soldiers from my unit who were killed in action. He began reading the names aloud to his live stream audience, making jokes about each one. Michael's voice remained steady, but those who knew him could see the effort it was taking. He called Lance Corporal David Chen, another dead Asian trying to prove he was British enough. He called Private Sarah Williams, a woman who got herself killed trying to do a man's job. He called Sergeant Tommy MacDonald Scottish trash, who probably died drunk. The impact of these words on the courtroom was immediate and visceral. Even Worthington's own lawyer looked horrified at what his client had said. "These weren't just names to me, Your Honor," Michael continued. "David Chen saved my life twice before he was killed by a suicide bomber while protecting a school. Sarah Williams died shielding Afghan children from sniper fire. Connie MacDonald threw himself on a grenade to save his entire squad." Tears were visible in several people's eyes as Michael spoke about his fallen friends with such obvious love and respect. When Mr. Worthington finished mocking the dead, he made one final comment that broke my resolve completely. Michael said, He looked directly at me and said, "I bet you wish you had died with them so you wouldn't have to stand here like a trained monkey for my entertainment." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Judge Whitmore had to call for order as people expressed their outrage at Worthington's cruelty. "That was when I stepped out of position," Michael admitted. "I walked directly to Mr. Worthington and told him exactly what I thought of his comments. When he laughed and suggested I was too much of a coward to do anything about it, I struck him once across the face." Michael straightened his shoulders, accepting full responsibility. "I violated my oath, broke military discipline, and brought dishonor to my regiment. I deserve whatever punishment this court decides to impose." But General Ashworth wasn't finished. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, "there's something else this court should know about Derek Worthington's behavior that day." Judge Whitmore looked intrigued. "Continue, General." Mr. Worthington's live stream was watched by thousands of people, including many military families. After his comments about the fallen soldiers, several family members of those dead heroes contacted my office. They were devastated by his mocking of their loved one's sacrifice. The general pulled out his phone and showed it to the court. "I have messages here from David Chen's mother, Sarah Williams' husband, and Tommy MacDonald's father. They're not angry at Michael for losing his composure. They're grateful that someone finally stood up for their children's memory." Worthington's confident expression was beginning to crack as he realized the depth of public sentiment against him. Furthermore, the general continued, "Mr. Worthington's social media followers have identified several other instances where he has deliberately provoked military personnel for entertainment. This appears to be a pattern of behavior, specifically targeting those who cannot respond while on duty." Judge Whitmore turned to Worthington with new understanding. "Mr. Worthington, is it true that you deliberately targeted Guardsman Harrison because you knew he couldn't respond while on ceremonial duty?" Worthington's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but the damage was already done. His live stream had recorded everything, including his own words about exploiting the guards' inability to respond. The case was taking a turn that no one had expected, least of all Derek Worthington, who had thought he would enjoy watching a war hero be humiliated in court. Instead, he was discovering that there are some lines that society will not allow to be crossed, even in the name of entertainment. Judge Whitmore studied the live stream evidence that had been submitted to the court, her expression growing increasingly stern as she watched Derek Worthington's calculated harassment of the guard. The video showed clearly that this had not been a spontaneous outburst, but a deliberate campaign to provoke a reaction for online entertainment. "Mr. Worthington," the judge said sharply, "I'm watching your own recorded evidence. And I can see you specifically targeting Guardsman Harrison because you knew he was required to remain silent. You even told your viewers that you were going to break the toy soldier for their amusement. Worthington's expensive legal team exchanged worried glances. Their client's own social media activity was becoming evidence against him, revealing a pattern of behavior that went far beyond the simple assault charges they had planned to pursue. Your Honor, Worthington's lead attorney interjected, my client was exercising his right to free speech in a public place. While his comments may have been inappropriate, they don't justify physical violence from a member of the military. But Judge Whitmore was no longer focusing solely on the assault charges. Counselor, I'm looking at evidence of deliberate harassment, targeting of military personnel, and what appears to be a calculated campaign to provoke an incident for commercial gain. Your client monetizes these confrontations through his social media channels, doesn't he? Before the lawyer could respond, a commotion arose in the gallery. A woman in her 60s had stood up, her face flushed with anger and grief. That's enough, she called out. You want to talk about David Chen like he was a joke? He was my son. Court security moved to restore order, but Judge Whitmore held up her hand. Please identify yourself for the record, Mrs. Helen Chen, woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. My son David was killed in Afghanistan 2 years ago. He died protecting children at a school. And yesterday I had to watch this man mock my boy's memory for entertainment. The courtroom fell silent as Mrs. Chen continued. Michael Harrison carried my son's body to safety after he was killed. He held him while he died. He came to David's funeral and has visited our family every year since. He wears that bracelet to honor David and the others who didn't come home. Judge Whitmore looked at the bracelet on Michael's wrist with new understanding.
Act.
Each name represented not just a fallen soldier, but a personal connection, a friendship that had ended in tragedy. Mrs. Chen, the judge said gently, I understand this is difficult. But no, Your Honor, Mrs. Chen interrupted, you need to understand. This man, she pointed at Worthington, he didn't just insult a soldier, he spat on my son's grave. He made money from mocking dead heroes. And now he wants Michael punished for finally defending them. More family members were standing up throughout the courtroom. The gallery was filled with parents, spouses, and children of fallen soldiers who had come to support Michael after learning about the case through military networks. Stara Williams was my wife, said a man near the front. 8. She died saving children in Kandahar. Michael carried her body home and gave me the flag from her coffin. This man called her death a joke. Another voice joined in. Tommy McDonald was my brother. Michael Harrison spoke at his funeral and has supported our family ever since. How dare anyone mock Tommy's sacrifice? Judge Whitmore was beginning to understand that she wasn't just dealing with a simple assault case. This was about something much deeper, the intersection of grief, honor, and the limits of human endurance. General Ashworth spoke again from his wheelchair. Your Honor, Michael Harrison didn't just earn his Victoria Cross through one act of heroism. He spent every day since then living up to the values it represents. He volunteers at veteran hospitals, supports military families, and has donated his entire military pension to charities for wounded soldiers. That's irrelevant to the charges, Worthington's lawyer protested. But his objection sounded weak even to himself. Actually, Judge Whitmore said thoughtfully, character evidence is very relevant to sentencing decisions. Continue, General. Michael requested assignment to the Queen's Guard, specifically because he wanted to honor his fallen friends through ceremonial service. Every day he stands at attention, he's standing for David, Sarah, Tommy, and 12 other soldiers who can't stand anymore. Michael's military lawyer, Captain Rebecca Stone, stood up with new confidence. Your Honor, I'd like to present additional evidence about Mr. Worthington's pattern of behavior. She handed a folder to the court clerk. These are records of 17 previous incidents where Mr. Worthington has deliberately provoked public servants for social media content, police officers, firefighters, nurses, teachers, all targeted because they're required to maintain professional composure while on duty. Judge Whitmore reviewed the documents with growing amazement. Worthington had made a career of exploiting people's professional obligations, pushing them to breaking points for online entertainment and profit. Furthermore, Captain Stone continued, Mr. Worthington's social media accounts showed that he specifically researches his targets beforehand. He knew Guardsman Harrison was a Victoria Cross recipient. He knew about the memorial bracelet. His comments weren't random insults. They were calculated attacks designed to cause maximum emotional damage. The revelation that Worthington had deliberately targeted Michael because of his war record sent another wave of anger through the courtroom. What had seemed like a spontaneous confrontation was revealed as a premeditated attempt to humiliate a war hero. Mr. Worthington, Judge Whitmore said, her voice now ice cold. Did you or did you not research Guardsman Harrison's military record before approaching him? Worthington looked trapped. His own social media posts showed clear evidence of his research, including screenshots of Michael's Victoria Cross citation that he had shared with followers before the incident. I was just trying to create entertaining content, he stammered. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. You deliberately targeted a war hero for harassment, Judge Whitmore replied. You mocked dead soldiers for profit, you turned a sacred memorial into entertainment. And now, you want this court to punish the man who finally said enough. The judge's transformation from stern authority figure to champion of military honor was complete. Whatever punishment she had originally planned for Michael was clearly being reconsidered in light of these revelations. Judge Whitmore called for a recess to review the new evidence. But before she could leave the bench, another unexpected figure entered the courtroom. Palace security announced the arrival of a distinguished visitor who had requested permission to address the court, Colonel Amanda Price, aide-de-camp to a senior member of the royal family, walked purposefully down the aisle carrying an official document bearing royal seals. The entire courtroom rose automatically in respect, sensing the gravity of her presence. Your Honor, Colonel Price said formally, I bear a message from His Royal Highness regarding this case. The royal family has been following this matter closely and wishes to make their position clear. Judge Whitmore looked stunned. In 30 years on the bench, she had never had royal intervention in a criminal case. Please proceed, Colonel. His Royal Highness wishes the court to know that Guardsman Harrison represents the finest traditions of military service, Colonel Price announced. The royal family considers him an exemplary soldier and guardian of British values. Any suggestion that he should surrender his Victoria Cross is viewed with serious concern. The formal language carried unmistakable meaning. The monarchy itself was supporting Michael against Worthington's accusations. Furthermore, Colonel Price continued, His Royal Highness has reviewed Mr. Worthington's social media content and finds it deeply offensive to the memory of fallen servicemen and women. The royal family does not support using military sacrifice as entertainment content. Worthington looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Having the royal family publicly condemn his behavior was the last thing he had expected from what he thought would be a simple assault prosecution. Colonel Price turned to address Michael directly. Guardsman Harrison, His Royal Highness wishes. You too know that your service, both in combat and in ceremonial duties, brings honor to the crown and to the nation. Michael bowed his head respectfully, overwhelmed by the unprecedented royal support, but the surprises weren't over. Another figure rose from the gallery, a man in his 40s wearing the dress uniform of a different regiment entirely. Honor, the man said. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Mark Stevens. I need to tell this court something important about Derek Worthington's previous behavior. Judge Whitmore was beginning to feel like she was presiding over the most unusual case of her career. 6 months ago, Mr. Worthington conducted a similar prank at the Cenotaph War Memorial. He filmed himself making disrespectful comments about fallen soldiers while veterans were laying wreaths on Remembrance Day. The courtroom gasped at this revelation. The Cenotaph was Britain's most sacred war memorial, and disturbing veterans during Remembrance Day ceremonies was considered deeply offensive. The incident was reported to police, but Mr. Worthington claimed free speech protections and faced no consequences. Since then, he's escalated his behavior, specifically targeting military personnel because he knows they can't respond while on duty. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens presented additional evidence to the court. We've documented at least 12 incidents where Mr. Worthington has deliberately provoked military personnel, always choosing moments when they're professionally obligated to remain silent. Judge Whitmore reviewed the evidence with growing amazement. What had appeared to be an isolated incident was actually part of a systematic campaign of harassment targeting Britain's military. "Mr. Worthington," she said sternly, "these documents suggest you've made a career of exploiting military discipline for profit. Is that accurate?" Worthington's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but the evidence was overwhelming. His own social media accounts documented years of similar incidents, each carefully planned to generate maximum controversy and online engagement. "Your Honor," Captain Stone interjected, "we'd like to present one more piece of evidence." Clerk a tablet displaying Worthington's social media analytics. Mr. Worthington earns approximately £15,000 monthly from his controversial content, with military harassment videos being his most profitable posts. This wasn't just cruel behavior, it was a calculated business strategy. Revelation that Worthington was profiting from military humiliation sent another wave of outrage through the courtroom. What had seemed like thoughtless cruelty was revealed as deliberate exploitation. General Ashworth spoke again from his wheelchair. "Your Honor, in my 50 years of military service, I've seen soldiers face enemy fire with courage, endure torture with dignity, and sacrifice their lives for others without hesitation. But watching good men and women being systematically targeted for entertainment, while they're forbidden to defend themselves, that's a form of cruelty I've never encountered before." Judge Whitmore was clearly struggling with the case now. The simple assault charges seemed inadequate to address the complexity of what had actually occurred. "Mr. Worthington," she said directly, "do you have anything to say in response to these allegations?" Worthington looked around the courtroom, seeing the faces of military families, veterans, and serving soldiers all focused on him with undisguised contempt. His usual confidence had completely evaporated. I was just making content," he said weakly. "It's what my followers expect. I didn't mean any real harm." "You didn't mean harm?" Mrs. Chen stood up again, her voice shaking with emotion. "You made money mocking my dead son's name? You turned his sacrifice into a joke for strangers on the internet." Other family members began speaking out, sharing how Worthington's cruel comments had affected them. The courtroom became a forum for grief and anger that had been building for months as his videos spread across social media. Judge Whitmore realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, a community of military families finally getting the chance to confront someone who had profited from their pain. "Order," she called, but her heart wasn't in stopping the emotional outpouring. These people deserved to be heard. As the family members shared their stories, Michael remained at attention, tears streaming down his face as he listened to the parents, spouses, and children of his fallen comrades. He had carried their grief silently for years, and now it was being shared openly in a court of law. The case was no longer about a simple assault. It had become a trial about respect, dignity, and the price of using other people's sacrifice for entertainment. After a 2-hour recess, Judge Whitmore returned to the bench with a decision that would surprise everyone in the courtroom. Her demeanor had changed completely, where once she had been preparing to punish a soldier for losing his composure. She now saw a more complex situation requiring a more thoughtful response. "This case has revealed issues far beyond a simple assault charge," she began. "I've reviewed all the evidence, consulted with legal precedents, spoken with my colleagues about the unique circumstances we're facing here." The courtroom held its collective breath as she continued. "Mr. Worthington, your behavior represents a systematic campaign of harassment against military personnel that has gone unchecked for too long. You have deliberately exploited their professional obligations for personal profit, showing callous disregard for their service and sacrifice." Worthington's face had gone pale as he realized the tables had completely turned. "However, Judge Whitmore," said, turning to Michael, Guardsman Harrison, "you took an oath to uphold military discipline regardless of provocation. That oath is not negotiable, even under extreme circumstances." Michael stood straighter, prepared to accept whatever consequence was coming. Therefore, the judge announced, "I am issuing the following ruling. Mr. Worthington, you are hereby banned from all royal properties and military installations in the United Kingdom. Additionally, you will pay a fine of £50,000. 2 military family support charities. The courtroom erupted in approval, but Judge Whitmore wasn't finished. Furthermore, Mr. Worthington, you will remove all content mocking military personnel from your social media platforms and issue a formal, public apology to the families affected by your behavior. Worthington started to object, but his lawyer quickly silenced him as the judge continued. As for Guardsman Harrison, Judge Whitmore said, her tone softening, while I cannot ignore your violation of military discipline, I find that your actions were the result of extreme provocation targeting the most sacred aspects of military service. Michael braced himself for the punishment. Therefore, you will be sentenced to community service specifically. You will spend 100 hours educating the public about military service and sacrifice. You will speak at schools, community centers, and public events about the real meaning behind ceremonial traditions. The unexpected sentence left Michael speechless. Instead of punishment, he was being asked to do what he loved most, sharing the stories of his fallen friends and educating people about military service. Furthermore, the judge added, with a slight smile, you will keep your Victoria Cross. This court finds that your momentary lapse in discipline does not diminish the extraordinary courage you demonstrated in earning that medal. The courtroom exploded in applause as military families, veterans, and supporters celebrated the decision. Michael felt overwhelmed by the unexpected support and understanding. But Judge Whitmore had one more surprise. I'm also ordering that this case be documented as a teaching example for other courts dealing with similar incidents. The intersection of free speech rights and targeted harassment of military personnel needs clearer legal guidance. As the formal proceedings concluded, something remarkable happened. Instead of leaving immediately, people began approaching Michael to share their own stories and offer support. Dr. Elizabeth Murphy, one of the medical personnel Michael had rescued in Afghanistan, had traveled from Birmingham specifically to attend the hearing. I've been following this case since it started, she told him. That man mocked your friends, but he also insulted everyone you saved that day. We couldn't let that go unanswered. The 2 nurses Michael had carried to safety were also present. Along with the convoy driver whose life he had saved, they had formed an informal support network around Michael, determined to ensure he received the recognition and respect he deserved. You know, said Nurse Patricia Wales, when we heard about this case, we realized we'd never properly thanked you for what you did. We were so focused on our own recovery that we never acknowledged you risked your life 4 times to save us. Michael looked embarrassed by the attention. I was just doing my job, he said quietly. No, Dr. Murphy corrected him firmly. You went far beyond duty that day, and every day since, you've continued to honor the friends you lost. Standing guard at Buckingham Palace isn't just ceremony for you, it's a daily memorial service. Meanwhile, Derek Worthington was dealing with very different consequences. His social media following had largely turned against him once the full story became public. Sponsors were dropping his content, and several platforms had demonetized his accounts for harassment violations. But more significantly, he was beginning to understand the human cost of his entertainment career. Sitting in the courtroom, listening to military families share their grief, had forced him to confront the reality that his victims weren't just uniformed figures, they were real people with real pain. As the courtroom gradually emptied, found himself face to face with Michael for the first time since the incident, the war hero looked at him with neither anger nor triumph, just a quiet sadness. I'm sorry I hit you, Michael, said simply. It was wrong, regardless of what you said. Worthington stared at him in amazement. Even after everything that had happened, Michael was apologizing to him. I'm the one who should apologize, Worthington replied, his voice barely audible. I had no idea. I never thought about the families, the real people behind the uniforms. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Most people don't. That's why I think my community service sentence is actually perfect. Maybe I can help others understand before they make the same mistakes. Mrs. Chen approached them both, her earlier anger replaced by something more hopeful. Mr. Worthington, she said, you hurt us deeply with your words. But if you're genuinely sorry, there's something you could do to help heal that hurt. Worthington looked at her expectantly, willing to do almost anything to make amends. "Help Michael with his education mission," she said. "Use your platform to share the real stories of military service, to turn your audience from mockers into supporters. Show them what you learned here today." The suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity. Worthington's massive online following could become a force for understanding rather than mockery, if he was willing to completely change his content approach. As they left the courthouse that day, an unlikely partnership was beginning to form, one that would transform both men's lives in ways they never could have imagined. 6 months after the courtroom confrontation, the unlikely partnership between Michael Harrison and Derek Worthington had produced something neither man could have imagined when their conflict began. Standing together at the Imperial War Museum, they were preparing to launch their joint documentary series about modern military service. "I never thought I'd be nervous about public speaking," Michael admitted to Derek as they prepared for the press conference. "I've faced enemy fire, but somehow this feels more intimidating." Derek smiled, a genuine expression that had replaced his old calculating smirk. "6 months ago I would have been filming you being nervous for laughs," he said. "I just want to make sure we get this story right." The transformation in both men had been remarkable to witness. Derek had completely overhauled his social media presence, deleting years of controversial content and rebuilding his following around educational material about military service. His audience had initially resisted the change, but the authentic stories he now shared had attracted a new, more engaged community. Michael's community service had evolved into something much more significant. His speaking engagements at schools and community centers had grown into a national program called Stories of Service, where veterans shared their experiences with young people across Brett. The documentary series they were launching represented months of collaboration between the former antagonists. Derek had used his technical skills and media connections to create professional quality films, while Michael provided access to military communities and authentic stories that had never been shared publicly. The first episode focuses on Mrs. Chen and her son David. Derek explained to the gathered journalists, "He wanted to show how one family's sacrifice ripples through an entire community." Michael's friendship with the Chen family demonstrates that military service creates bonds that last long after the fighting ends. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, beaming with pride as she watched the two men who had found common ground through her son's memory. The documentary had given her a way to share David's story with the world, ensuring his sacrifice would be remembered and understood. "We've also included interviews with the medical personnel Michael saved in Afghanistan," Derek continued. "Dr. Murphy, Nurse Wales, and Nurse Thompson all wanted people to understand that heroism isn't just about the moment of action, it's about the lifetime of service that follows." The press conference was being live-streamed to Derek's social media followers, but the audience was completely different from his old viewers. Military families, history students, and people genuinely interested in understanding service had replaced the trolls and troublemakers used to follow his confrontational content. Judge Whitmore, who had been invited as a special guest, spoke about the case that had brought them together. "This situation taught me that our legal system must evolve to address new forms of harassment that exploit professional obligations," she said. "But more importantly, it showed me that redemption is possible when people are willing to face the truth about their actions." General Ashworth, now serving as patron of their educational foundation, addressed the audience from his wheelchair. "Michael Harrison and Derek Worthington have created something unique, a partnership between former enemies that honors military service while promoting understanding between different communities." The general's words carried special weight. Because he had initially opposed any collaboration with Worthington, it had taken months of demonstrated commitment before he was convinced that Derek's transformation was genuine. The foundation they've established has already raised over £200,000 for veteran support services, General Ashworth announced. But more importantly, they've changed how thousands of people think about military service and the real people behind the uniforms. As the press conference concluded, Derek and Michael found themselves surrounded by supporters who wanted to share their own stories or volunteer for future projects. The hostile crowd from the original courtroom had been replaced by a community, United around respect and understanding, Mrs. Mitchell, who had become like a mother to both men, pulled him aside for a private moment. "My James would be so proud of what you've accomplished," she told them. "You've turned something ugly into something beautiful." Derek felt the weight of her words deeply. 6 months earlier, he had been making money from mocking her son's memory. Now he was dedicating his life to ensuring that sacrifice was properly honored. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said seriously, "I want you to know that every day I work on this project, I think about your son and the pain I caused you. I can never undo what I did, but I can make sure it never happens again." The elderly woman smiled and patted his cheek gently. "Derek, redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a better future. You've done that." As the event concluded, Michael and Derek walked together through London streets, past the very places where their conflict had begun. The Buckingham Palace gates were visible in the distance, where Michael would return to ceremonial duty the next morning. "Do you ever regret what happened?" Derek asked. "If you hadn't lost your temper that day, none of this would have started." Michael considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain it caused initially," he said. "But I don't regret the outcome. We've reached more people with stories about military service than I ever could have done alone. Your media skills and my military experience make a powerful combination." They stopped outside the cafe where Derek had celebrated his viral video 6 months earlier, laughing at what he thought was a harmless prank. Now the same location reminded them both of how much they had learned about respect, sacrifice, and work. The possibility of redemption. "You know what the strangest part is?" Derek mused. "I thought I was the one with power that day. I had the camera, the audience, the freedom to say whatever I wanted. But you were the one with real power all along?" "What do you mean?" Michael asked. "The power to change people's minds through your example," Derek explained. "The power to forgive someone who had hurt you deeply. Power to turn an enemy into an ally. That's the kind of strength they don't teach in business school." As they parted ways that evening, both men reflected on the journey that had brought them together. What had started with mockery and ended with violence had ultimately become a story of education, understanding, and the transformative power of genuine respect. Michael's Victoria Cross still hung proudly on his dress uniform. But now it carried additional meaning. It represented not just his courage in Afghanistan, but his willingness to stand up for his fallen friends, his ability to find common ground with former enemies. Derek's social media empire had been rebuilt on a foundation of respect rather than controversy, proving that authentic content could be more powerful than manufactured outrage. His followers now included military families from around the world, who trusted him to tell their stories with dignity. Their story had become legend within military communities, proof that even the most bitter conflicts could be transformed into meaningful partnerships when people were willing to listen, learn, and grow beyond their initial positions. The Victoria Cross remained where it belonged, on the chest of a true hero who had learned that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with patience, forgiveness, and the courage to help others understand what really matters.